Hey folks, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I'm going to show you one trick to get a tighter snare drum sound. We're going to be talking about snare drum today, but before we dive in, if you're looking to get a stronger snare drum sound and really dial in the tone on your snare drum, then I have just the thing for you today. It is my essential guide to recording snare drum, and it's a simple PDF that will walk you through everything you need from mic choice to mic placement to setting your gain structure to get a great sounding snare drum. No more guesswork, no more hassle when you're recording your snare drum. It's a completely free guide, and you can download it below using the link in the video description. Now let's jump in here and take a look at this snare drum. I have just the drums up here for you today. Let me play you the snare inside the finished drum mix, and then I will solo up our snare drum. I'll probably have to turn off our reverb here so you can hear the dry snare drum by itself, and you can hear what we have, what our finished snare drum sounds like before we dive into our trick here on tightening our snare drum tone. Here is the finished drums, and then I will solo up the snare drum by itself. You can hear our snare drum is powerful, strong, still has some length to it, has a nice hard hit to it, but it's nice and tight, very precise. It doesn't have a lot of back end ring to it. It doesn't sound crazy. Our snares aren't out of control. Reason being is we are utilizing a gate to keep our snare drum precise and to keep it tight so it's nice and snappy but still has some good power to it without it going too far, ringing too long, or being too crazy on the snare sizzle. I'm going to play the snare drum one more time for you, and I'm going to bypass this gate so you can hear what happens to our snare drum down the line as it finishes out our processing. So we'll start with our gate in, and then I'm going to turn it off. Pay attention to our snare drum length and how it gets a little bit messy sounding. So with a song that's as aggressive as this, you're gonna have someone that's really laying into their snare drum, and it's gonna sound big and it's gonna sound powerful, like that shotgun hit going off, right? If they're really laying into their snare drum, you're gonna get a lot of room sound that's gonna bleed into your mic because of how hard they're hitting their snare drum. You're gonna get a little resonance. You're gonna hear that snare sizzle ringing out into the room and into your microphone. What we're doing to take care of that is utilizing our gate to shorten our snare drum at the beginning of our processing. That way down the line, as we add stuff, we get a little bit of that length back, but it's not too much. And that way we're not fighting that length at the end of our processing. It's a little bit more difficult to put the gate on the end and then try to tighten the sound as a whole. It feels less natural that way rather than tightening the sound at the beginning of the process and then working on it from there to get it to sound good. So this is especially helpful with the red light distortion we have going before. I did a video that probably came out last week, depending on when these videos release, talking about using distortion on snare drum. So you can see that video. I could link to it below. I'll try to remember to put that in the link description. But our gate is helpful there because of the power and the resonance we're getting from the distortion plugin. I'm going to start at the top here and put our gate in. I want you to hear our snare drum sound before. I'm going to put the gate in. You'll hear how tight our snare drum gets, but you'll hear as we add the rest of the processing how it helps us down the line. Now you can hear our snare drum probably sounds too tight there, right? It sounds too short, too snappy, but pay attention. Keep your ears open here as we add the rest of the processing. you'll hear how the length grows back as we add the rest of the processing. You can hear the gate protects us from having too long of a snare drum when we finish our snare drum processing. Once we kick that red light distortion in, we get a lot of resonance and a lot of power coming off our snare drum. You can really hear the snare sizzle a little bit more up on the top end, and we don't want those to ring out too long. That's where our gate's coming in here. Let's break down our gate settings here. Fastest attack, because we don't want to wait. We don't want to trim off any of the snare transients. So if we have our attack higher, then we're going to lose some of the initial transient. Let me show you what happens if we bring our attack up. Hear how our snare drum doesn't have as much snap or attack to it? That's because the gate reacts the gate reacts and trims off the beginning of our snare drum. So we hear our snare drum and the gate isn't opening up fully until a little bit into our snare drum. So our snare drum hits and then our gate opens. We have our look ahead here so we can put our attack all the way up so our gate opens in time for that initial transient and that initial attack of the snare drum to come through. That way it stays snappy and it stays transient. So pay attention as I pull this up. You'll hear that attack start to come back into our snare drum. Now, if it's too much attack for you, just dial it back a little bit. I wouldn't go any further than probably 50 milliseconds, and even there is probably a little bit too much. Keep it close to 0. We're at 0.05 milliseconds here on the attack, so as fast as this gate goes, but anywhere from 5, 10, maybe even 20, you'll get some of that attack, but if you need to trim off a little bit, that'll work for you there. The hold is as fast as possible, so it's not holding on that long. And then our release, I set our release in time. So you want to look at your faster hits here and see how long you can let the gate hold or stay open before it trims back down. So pay attention here. We'll mess with our release a little bit, and you can hear how it changes the tone. So if you're looking for a tighter sound, you want a faster release. That means the gate lets go a lot faster. So it opens, snare drum hits, gate lets go, and it comes back down, closes back down on the snare drum. That's what your faster release is doing. A slower release means when the gate opens and your snare drum hits, it stays open much longer and then slowly closes back down. That will give you a longer sounding snare drum, and you heard that as I had it up at like a 1 second release. Here at like 200, it's a pretty tight, pretty snappy snare drum. So if you want less of that on the back end, you can tighten your snare drum more. And if you want more of it, just open up your release a little bit, let it be longer, and you'll hear more of that back end. Here we have it set about in time at 766 milliseconds. So it has this, allows the snare drum to breathe a little bit, doesn't cut into the next snare hit or anything when you have closer snare hits like this. But allows the snare time to breathe, gives us a little bit of length on the back end, a comfortable length that it's not ringing too much, it's not too short, and closes back down. One more time, pay attention. You can see in these faster snare hits how our gate is reacting. So you can see it's the perfect amount of time for our gate to open, close, open back up, and then close again after these faster hits here as well. Threshold, you just want to set it so your snare drum is going over it, but you don't want anything in between. So if you have bleed or anything, set it so it's just catching your snare drum. We're here at like negative 1440. It doesn't really matter on this because you can hear there's no bleed coming through on the snare drum. You just want to set it so it's not missing any notes and it's getting all of them. So just right where your snare drum's hitting. Range, I usually like to leave around negative 40. You can go higher if you want it to be just quieting your snare drum a little bit, and you can go all the way down if you want it to completely slam shut after your snare drum. One last thing here, let me put the snare drum back in our entire drum mix. I'll turn the reverb back on, and I'll A-B this gate inside the entire drum mix, and you can hear the effect as an entire package here with the drums. You can hear with the gate in, our snare is much tighter and it's much more precise, especially sending into a reverb to make our snare feel bigger, right? Like he's hitting in a bigger room. Sending into that reverb, if we don't have this gate on, you can hear it feels a lot muddier in the low-mid area because of how long the snare rings out. So all we do, we put our gate in, tighten our snare drum at the beginning before our processing so our snare drum feels tighter and more precise in the finished mix. I hope that was helpful for you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you're ready to level up your snare drum recordings and really start dialing in your tone, then I have just the tool for you, and it is completely free. It is my essential guide to recording snare drum, and you can download it below to start creating more professional snare recordings in less time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.